Hello, everyone. We at Cache Software would like to welcome and thank you for joining the webinar today. As you can imagine, the webinar platform itself is being heavily used. If you're having issues staying logged in or it seems sluggish, please be patient and know that you may need to log in again. We do recommend that you view today's webinar in a full screen mode, and this can be done by clicking the full screen button on the webinar's control panel. Use the orange arrow for collapsing and expanding the control panel. We also encourage you to use the questions feature located on the control panel to type and send any questions that you may have during the presentation. All attendees are muted as we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the recording in a follow-up email within the next few days. At this time, I would like to introduce our presenters, Prabha Manavasagar, our president, and Sam Frederick, our product manager. Prabha, I'm going to hand the ball over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Give me just a second here as I bring up my screen. Okay, Christine, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Prabha. You might want to make it in the presenting mode. Thank you.
There you go. Perfect. Great. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Welcome to our webinar series on EVV. We are doing a number of these EVV webinars over the course of the next few months, and this is the second in our installation of webinars. Samantha is joining me today. She's going to be helping out with the demo as well as some product-related discussions. And if you are using if you've not joined our webinar in the past and would like to see where our webinars are located, you can find those on our website under resources and the webinars link. And we encourage you to take a look at that. And what you see up here on the screen right now is a webinar that we did in April. So before I get started, Samantha, you have an announcement about Frontline Worker Pay. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Well, sure. It's a DHS announcement, really, but Frontline Worker Pay starts today. The application window opens for all direct care workers who have worked hard throughout the pandemic to keep things going and make sure all the individuals that you folks serve are cared for. So direct support workers are eligible for this requirement. They can go ahead and submit their application anytime between June 8th and July 22nd. It doesn't matter if they submit it today or at the end of July, and they're all processed at the same time. So there is an information sheet that I think is required to go out to all workers. So go ahead and check out the resources that we have here. It's the Frontline Worker Pay info sheet, and then there's the Department of Labor and Industry Worker Toolkit as well.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, I think this is a really good opportunity for those that have really worked hard during COVID-19 and helped clients receive some additional pay. So please take a look at that. And I'm sure most of you are aware, but if you're not, this information hopefully will point you in the right direction. Okay, let's get started with today's agenda. I want to do a quick recap of what we covered last April, in our last presentation in April. Talk a little bit about EVV realities and pitfalls, and we're going to, the webinar series is to really talk about the EVV journey and where the journey you are and what the current step is and how you would go about implementing a pilot in Pavilio, and we'll talk through some of the nuts and bolts of how that is done so that you can see how it works in Pavilio, as well as take some notes as to how maybe you could do it to have a better impact and a good outcome. And then we'll do a quick demo that Sam has for those who haven't seen it, and then a Q&A session. So recap of last webinar that we had in April. DHS announced the rollout and the different phases. We had our interpretation of what that meant, and we talked a little bit about that. And we also talked about how you would go about implementing EVV and what that EVV journey looks like. And before you could even start with EVV, what you should do to prepare. And we talked a little bit about how you go about doing that, and we covered a high-level EVV rollout plan. There are many things that Cache did and is doing to prepare for EVV, and we'll continue to do that. And we covered a variety of things that we are doing to prepare. By the way, we have about 8,000 EVV end users on our platform already, and the advantages we've gone through, we worked out kinks, and we are improving the product and adding new features. So all those things we will be covering over the next few months and telling you more about it. So just to bring everybody up to speed and make sure that we're all on the same page, the EVV in Minnesota is being rolled out in 3 phases. Phase 1 is the FMS agencies going live, and that actually moved up from June 30th to June 20th. The second phase is personal care agencies like yourselves, and all those will go live at the end, live in December. And we're anticipating that it will, while it starts in December, there is going to be some leniency in getting it up and running. And the way FMS is being rolled out, the state requires that the FMS agencies are connected to the aggregator. They don't expect 100% of their clients to be up on EVV, and we anticipate the same will happen with personal care agencies. You need to be connected to the aggregator, but you don't have to have all your clients up and running. But that gives us some wiggle room, but we advise and we encourage you to get it up and running, and for as much as possible implemented prior to that, because it's going to be chaotic come December, January, and the sooner you get ahead of it, the better it is. Phase 3, of course, is home health. That's end of 2023. The other thing that we're waiting to hear more about is how MCOs have not integrated with the aggregator yet, and that is still underway. We expect to hear more about that in August. As we hear more, we'll keep you updated. One of the things that's been that DHS is mulling around right now is live-in caregiver exemption, and there's been conversation about it. They have circulated some communication with FMS agencies getting their feedback, and that live-in caregiver exemption is being finalized. And so the live-in caregiver exemption is essentially, for example, a mother providing care for a son, and they live in the same household. DHS is thinking about not having them clock in and clock out every day, because that's not practical. Now, of course, if you have a external caregiver who comes in the house, that person would need to clock in. But if you're a live-in caregiver, then they're putting together some instructions or some approaches about how to do that and not have to make it burdensome for the caregiver. So we'll hear more about that, and as we hear more, we will update you on that. So why is DHS going with FMSs first? Well, I think they're using this as a proving grounds. They're trying to figure out how to roll out EVV, work out the kinks, so that eventually when it comes to agencies like yourself, they're going to be able to improve your experience. Now, Cache is right in the middle of the rollouts with the FMSs. Unlike any other vendor, and it will have a first-hand experience and a front row seat to this the rollout process, because the 6 agencies, FMS agencies that we're working with, will learn a lot from that, and then we'll gather those lessons learned and share those with you. So stay tuned, and we'll tell you more as we hear about what is happening in Minnesota EVV over the next few months. Okay. Just some realities and pitfalls. People, as we've done implementations, we learn more, and there's certain things that are just things that I think people should be aware of. December is not that far away. Before you know it, it's going to be here, and I think anything that you can do to implement and get up and running is just going to make things easier for you once the mandate is in place. What we've experienced is it takes longer than you think. We've had customers who started and then restarted because they learned something about the way we do implementations that's better, or the implementations may have stalled and they had to restart it because they didn't realize how much effort it took. So understand that it always takes longer than you think. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. The slow and steady wins the EVV race. Plan to start small, do a pilot, and then roll it out slowly. And eventually, by the time December is here, you'll have a much better experience. You're bound to run into technical and process issues, and the process, as we've improved our platform, there are fewer and fewer, and in fact, the technical issues are no longer the problem. It's adapting process to the platform is what we are seeing, and there are things that we have in this webinar that will help you deal with that. Start with the people that are willing to work with you. Not everyone is going to take the EVV, and knowing that and working with the people that want to work with you is going to make your experience that much better. We've had experiences where customers have downloaded the app and think, hey, listen, if we have the app and we give people logins, we're up and running. Not the case. There's a lot that goes into rolling out EVV for your caregivers. It is disruptive to the way the caregiver provides care and a client receives care. There's a lot that goes into it, and I think as leaders and of your agencies, there's much to be done beyond just downloading the app and giving it to caregivers. So let's talk about the EVV journey. In the last webinar, we talked about how do you get set up for EVV. Finding that champion within your organization is a big part of that. Making sure that you have someone who can provide some leadership, who is got a project plan, who can set expectations, and having that person drive it through is critical for the success of this implementation. Technology and process. In the last webinar, we talked generally about how you go about picking a tool, testing a tool, doing a proof of concept, and we kept it somewhat generic because that webinar was more not just for people of Pavilio or Cashier products, but for anyone. In this particular today's discussion, we're going to be talking about how you implement a pilot in Pavilio, but the technology and process part is an important component in implementing EVV because it really does change the way you do business, and in many things that are going to be positive, but it's still a change. And understanding that as you walk in is going to make things easier for you. So today, our discussion is really about how do you implement a pilot and roll it out and test it, troubleshoot it, developing an FAQ. But the whole idea is now that you have a tool, now that you have evaluated your processes, what does it mean to do a pilot? And that's what today's discussion is about. Here's an example of a customer, Nick Walters. He runs All Home Healthcare, and he's done a tremendous job of rolling out Pavilio very methodically. And initially, when he started, he would admit that maybe they didn't necessarily roll it out the way that would have been best. And he came to us. Samantha worked with Nick and some of the lessons that we had learned and put together an approach that now is working really well for him. One of the things that he's done is he's really made it a ingrained process of the organization to a point where now when a new client is brought on, there is no option for paper timesheet. They have to use EVV. And this is, everybody is going towards EVV. He's just ahead of the game, and he's done a really good job of setting it up. And Samantha worked with him to work out whatever technical issues and some process changes that he had to make. And they've done a really good job of getting it implemented and rolled out. So one of the things that Nick did was actually going through the pilot process. And so here are things that Nick did, as well as the things that we have now gathered as part of lessons learned from other implementations we've done. And what we're going to cover is, okay, how do you go about setting up a pilot? And to do that, how do you set up a pilot group? How do you communicate with clients and caregivers? What does process change look like, and how do you map it? Policy considerations. There has been a lot of discussion about, and we've had, based on our prior webinars, our customers have asked us, hey, what are things we should consider for policies when we develop a new policy? So we put together a list of items I think you should consider. I think you'll find this very, very useful and interesting. How do you train your internal staff? And then Sam is going to cover how to set up the system, how to set up Pavilio so that you can maximize some of the configuration parameters you have and make this a customized solution for your agency. How do you also set up clients and caregivers? Some of these things may sound basic, but we've run into situations where clients call up, our customers call up and say, hey, this is not working, and turns out there are some basic things that they have not done, and knowing what those are will really help with the implementation of EVV. And then finally, we'll talk about going live with the pilot and how that works and what are things you should be thinking about as you implement the pilot program. So, establishing a pilot group. This is a critical aspect of a successful EVV rollout. Picking the right clients and the caregivers can make a big difference in the success of a pilot. And most of that is really people that are really willing to work with you. Pilot is really testing the most common scenarios and making sure that you can tweak your processes and see how things work and start from start to finish, what are the steps and how things come together. The key here is this is not an attempt to try to break the system. You can do a variety of things to test and to break the system outside of a pilot. The pilot really needs to be about your most common scenarios, not the edge cases, which is something you should do in testing. So keep that in mind when you do a pilot. So what are the things that you would need for a pilot? We recommend 5 to 15 clients based on your organization size. Make sure that they're across multiple service lines. And this is important because if you have, say, PCA, it's pretty straightforward. In-home supports would be another service line where there are some goals and outcomes you're tracking. How does that show up in EVV? I think those are things to consider as you do, as you select a pilot group. Or try and find clients and caregivers that are eager, that are willing to try it, that are going to embrace it, because the issues that you're going to run into with people who don't want to do it and that are going to struggle are the ones that you want to deal with later, and not the ones you want to do in a pilot. We believe a 1-month pilot is which is about 2 pay periods, starting at the beginning of a pay period, would give you the experience and the necessary validation so that you can say that you've got a successful pilot and then tweak your systems as well as processes to be able to work when you start doing the rollout, phased rollout to the rest of the clients. It's good to have a pilot timeline, establish the key dates, make sure you have a project plan, because this is what you're going to communicate to all external as well as internal participants. Your internal staff, for example, we've had a number of customers who said, listen, we have a large agency, there is a lot of work to be done, and they hired someone to actually roll out EVV. Small agencies, you may not need to do that, but you still need to recognize that somebody needs to commit the time to do it. And if they're doing that, they're not doing something else. And as leaders, you need to find a way to free up their time from their other responsibilities so that they can execute on a pilot. Communication is key, and we see this as being one of the most important aspects of a successful pilot. And you might need to do this 2 or 3 times, and people just need to mentally prepare themselves for doing this. So, whatever is the best method that you use to communicate with your clients and employees, whether it's a letter, whether it's email, but get a plan together on communication. It's going to take 2, 3, 4 times to communicate so that you can get them prepared mentally to go through the pilot process. First of all, explain the DHS mandate and timeline. They need to understand, how much time we have, what we're trying to do here, and this is not something that you can, keep pushing off. Emphasizing the benefits of EVV. Every time we talk, people talk about the challenges of EVV, but there are many benefits of EVV, and emphasizing those benefits is really going to help get people's buy-in. Empathize with the struggles of making a change. This is probably the most important thing is recognizing that these people have done this on paper for so many years. Now making a change is difficult, and you having empathy is going to make it easier as they go through this change. The biggest thing is to reassure them that there's not going to be any disruption to service as part of doing this pilot, and that will be a good reassurance as they step up and do this with you. And for employees, for caregivers, guarantee that there's not going to be a payroll impact, or nothing's going to go wrong, whatever happens. Even if you have to, if there was a problem and you had to cut a out of cycle paycheck, you're willing to do that, and they need to know that this is not going to affect their paycheck. Make it clear about technical support. This is, you know, if you had 5 people in the office before and you were dealing with internet access and website, etc., now you're going to have, if you have 50 clients, you're going to have 100 different people using devices. They're going to run into things that are going to be technical in nature, and you don't have to be an IT support person, but at least you need to be able to provide some basic technical support to say, hey, okay, here's how the app works. You know, did you try this? Did you log in? Did you log out? Did you reinstall the app? Those are things that are going to help resolve issues with clients, because guess what? They all have different devices, and some devices are going to have issues, and they may require some help. And ultimately, if that's things that you cannot resolve, you're going to turn around and bring it to Cache, and then we will help resolve those issues. And always make it a point, assign a main point of contact as you go through the pilot. That person is going to be dealing with the clients and employees directly, and that's going to be very helpful to have the single point of contact. Provide training, whether it's webinar-based training, whether it's individual training, whether it's in-person training. We've seen it done all 3 ways. We've had customers who've done webinars, customers who've brought people in and bought them lunch and did trainings, have provided training videos that we have, but give them more than one option, give them that works with their schedule so that they can get training completed. Next, let's talk a little bit about mapping the process. I think it's important to map out the process to understand what happens. For example, what you see up there in blue, that is the employees who fill out the timesheet process starts with the employee filling out a timesheet. Once that employee fills the timesheet out, it goes to a client approval. The client signs the timesheet, and then the employee takes it, faxes it, or emails it to the agency. The agency receives it and then goes through a process of verifying the accuracy. If something's not wrong, sends the timesheet back to the employee. The employee or client makes corrections, then you get a fresh revised timesheet back. Then internally, you're doing a variety of things to verify units and availability of units, or essays and unit availability, etc. And then finally, it's keyed in as a paper timesheet, and then that's sent to a payer and payroll. In the EVV world, while the end result is that you want to send it to the payer and get payroll done, some things are different, and the employee clocks in and out. The client approves it in the app at the end of the week or on a daily basis. The agency gets that in the approval screen, and in the approval screen, the agency approves and finalizes it, and then that goes to the payer. If there may be if the agency decides that they are not going to approve it and reject the timesheet, what happens and how it goes back to the employee as a draft and then gets reworked and sent back. Those are things that happen, but knowing what your process is and how that is going to be affected, who are the participants involved internally within your agency and what their role is, might change, and therefore mapping it out makes a lot of sense. So this is just a sample. Your internal processes may have a variety of other factors involved, but whatever it may be, mapping the process is really going to make a big difference in everybody understanding and you being able to find the efficiencies as well as where some of the pitfalls might be. Again, Nick did as he implemented this, he realized that he needed a policy, and having the policy just basically meant that, hey, if somebody was not willing to do it, you'd say, look, this is the policy of being part of the agency. We've had agencies talk about, oh, if I force my clients to or caregivers to use EVV, they might leave. And here's what Nick said. They have hundreds of clients, and he's at one client quit as a result of this. So don't be afraid of that. Understand that wherever a client goes, they're going to have to do this, and this is reality now. And having a policy in place is really going to alleviate some of those issues and challenges. To that end, we decided to compile a list of items, and we'll continue to evolve this document and share this with you. The things that you might want to consider in developing a policy. Having a policy will prevent some of the confusion. It will be a clear communication of expectations for the caregivers and clients, and you have policies for various other things. This is a new thing that you're having to do. Having a policy makes a lot of sense. So what are the things that you would want to cover in the policies? What do you do if a visit is missed, and how should that be handled in EVV? What can you do with editing clock in and clock out time? How many times would you allow someone to edit it before you say, hey, there's an issue here? Being clear about that, I think, is important. Visits can, in our app, a caregiver can do a visit, but does not have to submit it, and it can sit in draft. If that happens, how long will you allow that to happen? For example, if you're going to run payroll every week or every 2 weeks, you need to do that. Well, they need to have some deadlines, and they need to know that things can't sit in draft. So what's your policy around that? Process for entering time when EVV system is unavailable. It's technology, there may be issues, and if there is, you should have a policy that says, here's what you should do. If you're unable to log in or the system is unavailable, here's what you should do in terms of a paper timesheet as a backup method to get this done. And then when the system is back alive, then do a manual entry of the time so that it can be captured. Whatever your policy may be, having a backup plan will make sure that time is captured and that people know what to do in the event of a technical issue. Communicate the different thresholds that are available. In our system, you can establish when services, when units are running out for a service, we have a threshold that we can set that says, hey, you're close to running out, and that's a warning. They can still clock in, but it's a warning that you're going to run out. And then finally, when units do run out, then it will stop people from clocking in. And you can adjust when this happens. If you and these are percentages. It's when you hit 5%, it's going to warn you. When you hit 1%, it's going to stop you. Or you may have it's 3%, it's going to warn you. When it's 0 units left, that's when it's going to stop you. So these are things that you're going to establish, and Sam's going to talk about how you establish those things. But once that's established, you should communicate that with clients and caregivers so that they know what the thresholds are and what that means. There are, one scenario is when they're unable to clock in because there aren't units, and there are other scenarios which also will prevent a employee from clocking time. And if that happens and it says contact agency, it's important for you to say who are you going to contact, here's the phone number, or how you should go about doing this. Establishing how that is going to work is an important aspect, and we learned this through agencies that have implemented, and the necessity for how do you handle if the calls come in during the work hour, how do you handle it if it's after hours. What are some client and responsible party approval policies? When should they approve time? How frequently should they approve time? Because if it's unapproved, you can't pay the employee, and there should be some guidelines around here's how many days of grace period you have before the time is approved. In our application, we have a function called override, and override allows for When you do run out of units, you are still expecting a service agreement from the case manager, but don't have it. How are you going to handle it? And allows people to clock in without having a service agreement. So what does that policy look like? And when will you override it? And when will you not override it? How long will you override it for? These are things to be considered. So just a final thought on policies. We believe it's important to add this, and you may have other things you want to add, but having this policy and presenting it just sets the proper expectations and makes things a lot smoother. And we've seen that happen over and over again with implementations that we've done. Now, internal staff also need to be prepped, and they need to be ready. They need to know what was communicated to the caregivers and clients, establishing that here's the process we do with paper, here's the process we're going to do with EVV, here's your role in it, here's what you're responsible for, and understanding that and communicating that, I think, is very critical. It is important to recognize that this is additional work as you're doing an implementation. Now, once it's up and running, it's going to be less work, but the work changes from what you may do manually to what's automated versus the approvals you have to do. So things change, and there is going to be a workload difference from what you did with paper versus EVV. But people need to know that, and recognizing that there is going to be a uptick in work as you're doing the pilot and you're trying to do both paper and EVV, knowing that and communicating that with the staff is helpful. Eventually, this is going to reduce work, and the staff understanding the benefits is going to be good, because you know what, they are ultimately having to do the work, and ultimately reducing work means they're able to get other things done within the agency. It is important to emphasize that, you know, a lot of things that are in a timesheet, there's a human element in validating the timesheet, and humans make mistakes. With a tool, there's going to be greater accuracy, and the automation benefits means you're not going to have to double check things. There are going to be ways that the system is going to validate things. These are some of the benefits of EVV, and the more the staff understand that, the more they will embrace it. The more you get them to buy in, the more they're going to sell it to clients and caregivers and make this whole process a lot easier. Allow them to test and play with the app and get comfortable and confident with using it. We have the ability for internal staff to play around and test it. So use those capabilities so that people become familiar, so that when a client or employee a client or a caregiver calls in, they can actually help them with some of the challenges they might have. In the approval process, as the person who was approving timesheets prior now is going to be approving visits in the portal. What does that look like? Try it out. Look at the different menu options. These are going to be, you know, how do you handle exceptions? These are things that you have to work through, and it's good for you to get people in a trial environment to go through that. And as I said earlier, there's some basic mobile device troubleshooting that's going to be helpful, and recognizing that this is, you know, this has become as part of your process, you're going to have to provide some of this support. Pick the person who is most likely to be successful in doing that internally and is more comfortable with mobile devices, is going to be able to troubleshoot and help, but make sure that staff is aware of that responsibility. Okay, now I would like to talk about several of the things that the system is capable of configuring. Sam, who's the product manager for Pavilio, is very familiar with these. She does this and helps customers go through this. Sam, can you walk us through the different things that you can set up in the system to customize EVV for each agency?
Sure. So in masters and configurations, Pavilio has many configurable options that will steer your agency towards your policies that you've set up. And Prabha mentioned a number of policy considerations that you should have. So the first one is that EVV warning and clock in, or stopping the clock in. For the warning, that threshold is set at for your agency to display an alert to the employee that they're approaching the end of the available units. So at your 1% or 3%, whatever your agency decides, it will allow the employee to be aware that they will they only have that much remaining, and then they'll need to contact the agency to avoid any future issues. And the stop and clock in is along that same line, where you set your threshold, and this will allow the monitoring of the units, so the caregiver won't be able to clock in once those units are exhausted. And remember, the system won't stop an active visit, but the caregivers won't be able to clock in for any visits going forward once that threshold is reached. Manual time entry, similar process for manual time as with EVV, but this is more, for your living caregivers or folks who are using that manual time entry option. The system will display again that warning message that the units are reaching that threshold, and will stop clock in once that is reached. The grace period for clocking scheduled shifts. If you use the scheduler, you're able to set up a grace period that will allow some wiggle room for your caregivers. We know that they can't clock in maybe the moment they arrive at their work site, so you can set up if it's within 5 minutes of their start time or 10 minutes, you can allow for some grace time for them to get up and going before you're alerted to that missed visit.
One of the things, Sam, if
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
could, in Minnesota, schedules are not necessary. Other state schedules are, and many of our customers don't use scheduled visits, but some do. So this is applicable for those who use scheduled visits. You can use the system without scheduling visits, and that's one of the flexibilities you have in the Pavilio product.
Yes, good addition, Prabha. Grace period for that timesheet submission. This, we know, within the paper timesheet world, folks will say, oh, I forgot to turn in time from 4 months ago, so now I'm going to submit my timesheets. And this gives you more control over what time frame you're allowing them to submit those timesheets, so you know that you're not going to get timesheets from 6 months back if you set that timeline to be 60 days or 30 days.
Yet another thing that should go in your policies.
Yes, yep, correct. And then the geofence radius, we know, Minnesota has stated their 500 miles. In Pavilio, currently it is set at 200 meters, and this is a flexible variable that you will be able to adjust based on your agency preference. If you think, a 50-mile radius of the client's home or the service location is what it should be, then you have that flexibility to set that in the system. And forced clock out, if an employee forgets to clock out, the system will add a forced clock out time after a certain period. The default value here is 24 hours. So if the employee forgets to clock out after 24 hours, the system will clock them out. This allows other caregivers to clock in if necessary, but you can set that to be less time if you'd like. Next, we have the client setup, and like Prabha said before, some of this is pretty basic, but we want to be sure that as you approach EVV, you're all set up for success. So in order for the client to be ready for EVV, they need to have a valid and active service agreement, and they need to have a care delivery with those activities. So in their assessment, they have their care areas, and you need to set up the care delivery with these activities. So the caregiver, when they sign into the app, they'll be able to see all of the options or all of the requirements for that client for that day. And the interim service agreement, so we all know that, we don't get service agreements promptly all the time when they end. So having the ability to add an interim service agreement and knowing when service agreements are going to end, so you can be proactive in having an interim set up so that there isn't a lapse in service. If the client or the caregiver tries to clock in with a client after the service agreement has ended, they will receive a message saying there is no active service agreement, contact your agency. And again, the client does need to be eligible for service. They need to have their MA eligibility. In the client profile, you do need to have that caregiver assigned in order for them to see the client in the app. So on the caregiver tab of the client profile, you'll need to assign that caregiver to the client, and this will allow for care to be provided. Also in the client profile, we have the care coordination tab, and this will allow you to set up the main service location or multiple service locations depending on the needs of the client. So if care is normally provided at the client's home, maybe he also spends some time at grandma's house, or you start visits at the gym. These locations can also be added, so you can, the caregiver when clocking in can select the location they're providing service, and the geofence radius will start at that location then. Establishing the responsible party login credentials or the client login credentials. If the client is authorizing their own service, then they will need that valid and active email address. If they have a responsible party who is authorizing service for them, the responsible party will need to be added in the contact info tab in the client profile, and then a user in manage users will also need to be created, and they will receive an email address with the temporary password and a PIN number to that email. And the same for the client. If they are the one providing the service, again, that active and valid email address, and they will receive a temporary PIN number and a password to that email. Setting up the caregiver, you'll want to double check before you assign the role for the caregiver that the client is assigned. You'll need to establish a pay rate for the EVV service. So a pay rate needs to be set up for each service line that the caregiver is performing. And if the rates are defined individually, so if they are $15 for PCA and $12.50 for maybe a homemaking service, they are set up individually and they can be set up by client. Otherwise, just one pay rate as a caregiver to provide any service will allow for that clock in as well. And then setting up the login credentials for the caregiver. After the caregiver is onboarded, they do also need to have a valid and active email address, and they will receive that temporary password to their email as well. And a good reminder, just when you're setting up the caregiver, just to verify the role is correct before you send that out. So that is the basics of the system setup. And yeah, go ahead, Prabha, take it over for the pilot.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so now let's talk about your 1 week before the pilot. What are the things you should consider? If you're 1 week before the pilot, it's important for you to reach out, make sure that you give them a heads up. We have training videos that you can send to them and get them up to speed. Remind them that they'll be getting an email with the password and the PIN number that will trigger, when triggered, that they would receive it's something that the admin that you would do that results in them getting the credentials. Then it's important to go back and check to say, hey, we sent the credentials out. Did you get it? Did you receive it? Did it go in the spam? And some of these things, you know, we take for granted, but the more of the hand-holding you can do with the pilot group, the more successful the pilot is going to be. We have agencies that have brought people in-house and perform training. And we have methods to do fake time and enter the time, see it go through, and then you can delete the time, so it's not going to affect payroll or billing, but our system allows you to do that. So make use of that to do some training. Log in as the caregiver, test out, how do you pick the client, enter the time, enter ADLs, sign and submit with the caregiver, see how it works. Now, some caregivers would say, hey, you know what, send me the video, I'm fine. Others would require some help. Deciding who needs help and who can do it themselves and supporting them is a big part of preparing for the pilot. RP or a client. How would you approve time? How do you verify units? These are things that you can show them and you can walk through with them. That'll make them feel more comfortable. And of course, as I said, once the time comes in, you can delete it. From the staff side, you can go through and look at the approval screen and delete the time so that it doesn't go to payroll or for billing, but it was a test. And all of that are things that you can try out a week before the pilot. Now, let's assume today is the go live date for the pilot. Tomorrow is the go live for pilot. So what would you do today? Call and remind the clients that, hey, starting tomorrow, and as we suggested, it should be a start of a payroll cycle. Answer any questions, get them, make sure they've got they're able to log in, things are working. Have that main point of contact available if they run into any issues. This is very important. The sooner that they can get an answer, the more likely that they are not going to get frustrated. And also in Pavilio, when someone clocks in, you can see when someone is clocked in and receiving services, and so you can just to build confidence, you can say, hey, by the way, I see that you're clocked in and things are working good. Thumbs up is a good way to encourage them. And then, so I say after, as you go through the pilot and after a week, there is time, the time is ready to be approved. Work with the client and follow up and see, are they able to see the time? Can they approve it? What are some questions that they have? So since everything is being automated, you also want to maybe do some validations. Hey, was it the right service agreement? Was it the right unit consumptions? Did the ADLs get recorded? And can you see it? Are the notes being entered? And can you verify the notes? And then once that's done, go through that the next week as well, and then push this to billing and payroll. So while it all seems like it's pretty straightforward, but some of the things that you can do to encourage people as they go through the pilot process is really going to help, one, uncover issue, and two, keep the level of excitement and the adoption high with the caregivers and the clients. And of course, you want to document the lessons learned and tweak your processes, because there are things you're going to find out and there are things you're going to have to adjust based on how the system works and how people react. So be willing to do that and look for opportunities to go through the documentation. It is important to go back and talk to clients and caregivers, address any open issues that they might have, as well as take all the lessons learned and create a frequently asked questions list, so that when you onboard new clients and new employees, you can share with them what some of the issues that they might run into, and give them a frequently asked questions list. Given that we have, by the way, if you have questions, please enter those questions in the question section on the webinar app. And we will be answering those questions, as well as if whatever we don't get to, we will send responses to when we send the link to the webinar later this week. Now, some of you have seen the product and how it works, how EVV works. Sam's going to walk you through the basics of how a client logs in and caregiver logs in and how a client approves. And for those of you who haven't seen it, some of the things that we talked about would make a lot more sense as we go through it. Sam, can you share and share your screen and walk us through the demo?
Yes, I can.
I can see your screen now.
Which screen do you see?
Well, I see the current client screen.
Okay, perfect. So can you see my EVV app here?
Yes, we can see your EVV app. Just for people to know, the EVV app itself runs as an Android app, and I think it looks better in the format you had, Sam.
Yep,
that's much better. And so imagine this is a app. The Pavilio app works both in in the web, as you see here, as well as on an Android or iOS device as a native app. So for demo purposes, Sam is going to show you how to use it if you are logged into a computer. Go ahead, Sam.
All right, so today Bill is our caregiver, and he's going to log in, clock some time with Halimo. So we are going to locate Halimo here. And Bill works with plenty of clients. So we're going to clock in, and we're doing personal care. So we'll select PCA service today. And once Bill's clocked in, we've got a number of things here that are in the app. We can see we've got the date, start, start time, service agreement. Here are those activities that we talked about. So these are the activities that are set up in the care delivery that you establish when you enter in that document. So any activities that you enter in will display here for the caregiver to select. Today, Bill is going to do some bathing and dressing. And then you have the option to enter notes. So if something happens throughout the day that you want to document, you can make notes here and you can save this as a draft, and then it remains open. You continue to enter notes as your day goes on. I'm just going to say, you know, Halimo had a good day today. And then we've got the signatures. So Bill is going to sign off that he did provide the service. And down here, if Halimo was her own responsible party, or her own, authorizing her own service, she could sign, enter in that 4-digit PIN number, and then we can submit that time. But Halimo is not going to do that today. Also, if the responsible party is present and wanting to submit that time right away, they can select the responsible party option here, and they can select which responsible party if there are multiple. I'm going to say Bill, and then can sign off, and again you have to enter that 4-digit PIN number. For demo purposes, I'm going to say not available, so we can take a look at the responsible party view as well. I'm going to clock out, we'll end the visit, and then once you're completed here, it gives you the stop time, so you can make adjustments to that if needed, and then you will submit this as your time entry. And the time has been submitted now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of Bill as the caregiver. We're going to log in to Bill as the responsible party, and we'll take a look at how that visit comes across for the responsible party. So for your people that have dual roles, in this case, Bill is both a caregiver and a responsible party. When they log in, they have one single sign-in and they see both roles. So for this case, we're going to select responsible party. And Bill is the responsible party for multiple clients. So he's got Marjorie and Halimo. So we're working with Halimo now. And I see up here at the top, we've got 2 timesheets. So we can take a look at those. Before we hop into that, we see the available units right here on this main screen. So we were authorizing service for PCA. And this tells us how many units have been consumed out of how many available, as well as hours. And then the breakdown of how many hours per day, per week, and per month through the service agreement span. So we'll hop into the timesheet, and we see there's still one left over from April here, but this is the one we're working with now. So I see that Bill clock time from 10:49 to 10:51, and I can reject this or I can approve this. And I can click this view details and see all of the service that was provided as well as notes. So if I reject this visit, this goes back to the caregiver to make any changes that are needed, and then they would resubmit. For this, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. So I'm going to sign off that yes, I approve this visit. Okay, and that has been successfully submitted. So now if we hop in here to this is the agency side. We'll go to the approved visits, and we're just going to search for today. And we're going to see the visit that we just submitted right here. And it's coming into the warning card because it is both invalid as a less than 7 minutes, and it's beyond the geofence. So that lets you know as an agency that you need to take a special look at those timesheets because they have some flag. We have a number of flags in here that will trigger them to go into the warning card. And in this incomplete, you'll see any of those records left in draft form that Prava had mentioned before, and all others that can be approved and are ready to go into this pending approval bucket. So you can approve them at the agency level all at one time. Prava, is there anything you want to add?
No, thank you. That was really good. Again, a reminder, I've been getting some questions as Sam was going through this. Feel free to ask questions as we continue. Let me
send it back to you.
Yeah, send it back to me, please.
You got it.
Okay, can you see my screen, Sam?
Yep, I can.
Perfect. Okay, so that was a quick demo of the product and its capabilities for those who haven't seen it. Now let's, helpful if I can move my screen. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to just also highlight is there are things that are in the application, the Pavilio application and our EVV tool that we believe are unique and good features. For example, dual role login. You can be a caregiver and an RP. You don't need to have two different logins. Activity-based care plans. This is an important aspect. The state requires you to document the activities. For EVV purposes, you just need to clock in and clock out, but why would you want to do that on paper? Why not tie the care plan to the activities and record that and make all that electronically captured, and for audit purposes, you can go back and pull up the record. So having that activity-based care plan is important. Real-time utilization availability, I just got a question about, hey, is this real-time and is this accurate? And the answer is yes. The utilization information and available units is real-time, and it is, we have a concept of units that are consumed as well as the ability to see units that are still not approved yet. And so these are things that are going to help you really manage unit utilization from a client and from a RP and approval perspective. 245D outcomes can be tracked in the app. Non-EVV services will be available, so it doesn't matter what service you are that you're using, those can also be available in the app. Caregivers can work for multiple agencies and use the same login. Client can sign on a caregiver's device using a PIN number. We are adding a live-in caregiver attestation that would allow for, once DHS finalizes the live-in caregiver rules, we will be able to have the caregiver sign off saying, yes, I'm a live-in caregiver, and then you can store that as documentation. Shared care is also one of the things that that we'll be able to do. MCO billing is another thing that we already do. Clock in validations for eligibility, OIG, pay rates, all of these things would reduce the number of errors and streamline the clock in and clock out process, and then simplify billing and payroll. So these things are already built in, and schedules are not required. So these are just some of the things just off that we thought of. There are many other things that are benefits, but just so that you know, when you compare our product versus others, these are things that we feel are important. Okay, question and answer. Sam, you've been responding to some questions. Let's take a minute here for those that might have questions. Please enter that in the question section. If you do, if we don't get to your questions, please bear with us. We will get back to you and respond to them and send it to you with the webinar recording. There is a question here. Yes, for MCO billing, please clarify if Pavilio is current capable of billing MCOs. A question that came in, absolutely yes. Pavilio currently will bill all MCOs, and it's working for many of our customers. So the answer is yes, Doreen. You can bill MCOs. What I was referring to earlier in the webinar was the state hasn't made a decision or hasn't clarified if services provided by MCOs need to be sent to the aggregator. That's the part that they haven't clarified yet, because it is mostly because the aggregator has not connected with the MCOs and pulled data from the MCOs. So you sending data that for MCO paid services, they have no way to compare that in the aggregator, and that's why DHS is still sort of waiting for that to happen before they say yes. For all MCO-based services, you also need to send the visit information. Now, from our perspective, we already have the capability to send it. It's just that DHS doesn't require it because they don't have a way to match it up. Let's see, I want to be respectful of people's time. There are a few other questions that I didn't get to. We will certainly respond to those in our a recap of this webinar and when we send out the emails. I want to remind everybody that we have another webinar coming up on the 20th. That webinar is on claims and denials and rejections and how do you bill more efficiently and get paid quicker. One of the things that we strive to do is to reduce the first-time denial rate of Medicaid claims, and as of right now, the average, industry-wide average is 18%, and in Pavilio, the first-time denial rate is under 2%. So another way to help run your business and get cash coming in the door. Once again, everyone, thank you for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Have a great rest of the week.